Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've just been to see Ken Loach's new depressing film, Sorry We Missed You. Hot on the heels of I, Daniel Blake, which came out 3 years ago.
Yes.
And won the Palme d'Or.
And which we saw together.
Yeah, this was pre-podcast, so we never did a podcast on it, but we saw it together and...
And we had, one of those incredible moments at the cinema. There was like this pensioner there, who just stood up at the end of it and went on a rant, like an emotional rant, something like...
I remember what he said. It was one line, so maybe it doesn't qualify as a rant, but it was impassioned.
Okay.
He said, "We're the 5th richest country in the world, and this is a disgrace."
Yes.
I, Daniel Blake was about the benefit system primarily, set in Newcastle, and it was about a guy who was dealing with the benefit system, and there was a female character who was using food banks, had kids to support, that sort of thing. It was very depressing and very pointed and very targeted at the Conservative government.
Yes, it was like a political intervention, really, and I suppose that Daniel Blake has become a byword for what Tory Britain has become. The story shambles.
Yeah, but
I insist on underlining.
Yeah, well, that's what they really both have in common is the Tories, really, rather than... Although, I think the thing that's interesting about this film, which is more about the gig economy as well as lots of other things, it feels less targeted at the government. It feels more widely targeted at systems of oppression.
Neoliberal economies.
Yeah.
Yeah. In which no one takes responsibility for the oppression. It's like everything is computer says no, or machine demands that, or yeah.
Yeah. So the film starts off with your main man, Ricky, I think, is he's got a wife, he's got a couple of kids to support, and he goes for a job at a delivery company, an Amazon type. They just do the parcel deliveries. But the job is sold to him as you're your own boss.
Yes.
So he has to own his own van, or he can hire one from the company at £65 a day, or he can have his own van. So there's really no choice there. He has to make the runs. If he doesn't make the runs, then he pays fines. If he needs to have a day off, he needs to find a replacement driver. Basically, everything that the company should do,
yes,
is now on him. But he's a franchise owner, so that makes it great. And of course, it's complete bollocks, and you know this from the start. So he's under an awful amount of pressure.
Yes. The thing that I hate about Ken Loach's films, and it applies to this one as well, is that it's relentless, right? It's like misery heaped upon misery, heaped upon misery, heaped upon misery, really. And you know it's coming. So
it feels like a parody early on, the way that everyone has something. No one is allowed to kind of escape. I mean, there's even one point where someone's walking a dog, and the dog has 3 legs. I mentioned to you, like even the dogs can't escape misery.
So, and I think, there were moments in this film that I found quite touching. But I just have a real fundamental philosophical worldview that is different than Ken Loach's. I don't believe working class people are like this. I am a working class person. And this is just relentless misery upon relentless misery. Actually, I had this experience when I went to see his Sweet 16 in Paris. And the theater applauded in Paris. And I thought, the reason why all these people are applauding is because this is the way that Frenchmen like to see British people, right? In like housing estate, drug addicts, like miserable, right? Like, with not a moment of joy or humor in the whole thing. And actually, I think this is a bit like this.
See, I would say actually what really emphasises that is that you do get just a moment of humour in this, which is when they're eating the curry. And it's in the trailer, the dad eats a vindaloo and he goes, "You got to be a man to handle this." And then he chokes because he can't.
Okay,
that's the moment of joy.
Okay, well, I didn't find that joyful or funny.
No, that's the moment of levity they have in their lives. Their otherwise terrible, terrible lives.
Yeah, and so I suppose if you buy into this view that if you are poor, your poverty equals de facto relentless misery, then, kind of the film is for you. I don't believe that. I mean, of course, I do think that poverty is terrible and that it's really oppressive and that people's lives are diminished as a result of it and that it's really unjust. But I think even within all of that, being poor doesn't mean you don't have a sense of humor. It doesn't mean that that people aren't kind to you, that you don't have great sex, that you might be beautiful. I mean, there's all kinds of, that you might have a lot of love, you might give a lot of love, right? Like you don't see any of that in Ken Loach's films. It is just like one miserable thing after another, and I just disapprove. And actually, I think at moments like this, one of the functions of art has to be, we know the world is miserable. I don't think he's showing us anything, that an educated person or that a person who reads a newspaper, or in fact, if you're a working class person, you know it better than anybody, right? We all know this, right? Kind of what we don't know is how to get through this, really. And I think, what he's showing us is stuff that we all know, right? So he does kind of give an emotional context for it. He allows you to feel kind of with it, right? But kind of, it's relentlessly miserablest, and I hate it.
Can I disagree in part?
Of course.
I think, to an extent, you're right, that he's showing us stuff that we all know. We all know these stories from the papers, from like dispatches on Channel 4, whatever it might be. We know about these stories about how people are oppressed in all sorts of ways. And about how, so the wife in this as well is a carer. She doesn't, she's kind of given the runaround. She doesn't have the support that she needs to do what she needs to do, all that sort of thing. But I think it's one thing to intellectually know it, and it's another to dramatise it. And I think the way it's dramatised here, although you can absolutely see all the cogs turning, and you can see like one misery after another piles on and on and on, it's pretty scary, actually, how plausible it all is.
Well, I think
and how realistic it's made.
I think it's more than plausible. I think it's true.
But the point is, it's scary because of it. You can believe, kind of. You think, I think in a way, you kind of think, there, but for the grace of God go I. Like, actually, this is how bad it could be, and it wouldn't take all that much to be in this awful situation. And the thing that you say about the people not being able to love or anything like that, I don't think is quite true, because they do express love for each other. They're a very tight family unit. They have their struggles. They have the very tight family unit, but their love speaks through how they struggle to stay together.
That's the best thing about the film, though I also found some elements of it bewildering. I thought, for example, the young boy, knowing the financial strain his family is in, for him to do things that would cost his father like a week's wages, I just don't get that.
I think I kind of imagine myself in his shoes a little bit, and I thought maybe he doesn't know. Like, I mean, the thing is, as a parent, how much do you actually tell your kids about the financial situation you may or may not be in?
But they do tell. The father does say, I have to pay £100 for this and £100 for that, and
yeah, but I was kind of paying attention. I'm not sure that ever makes it to the son, actually.
I know there was a dinner table conversation where the father tells him, "You cost us this much."
He may have done, okay. Well, but that's after he's acted out. Like. He may tell him the consequences, but I think the thing is, as a parent, I think he does what parents do, is try and protect his kid and not tell him everything that he's going through. Not only that, it's not necessarily the kid's business. So
I could understand that.
I kind of, I can see the kid acting out. That all felt pretty believable to me. The way that went. I know there wasn't a point where I questioned it really.
I mean, for me, kind of, it just would have been too much. If on top of like all the misery that they're going through, it would have been like a dysfunctional family or a family where people hated each other. I mean, that would have been even more unbearable. Though I did find it kind of unbearable. And actually, the last 10 minutes or so, I thought, kind of, where is this heading? Like, how can it possibly get worse? Is he going to kill him or something? Or is he going to run over one of his kids as a result of this? It was just like
you
too
kind of think
much.
Where's it going to go? But I think the way it ended up was an appropriate place, which is that he, despite everything that he's been through, he has no choice but to get himself to work, despite the fact that it's a fucking joke the way he's treated and lied to by the guy who runs the company, who says you're in charge, and of course he's not at all. The fact that everything that transpires, despite so much of it not being his fault, just being a consequence. So, he can't make the deliveries on time because he's given so many of them. The daughter actually steals the keys, thinking that, it'll put things back to normal. She makes a mistake. She's a young girl. It's not the son who does that. But, that leads to further problems because she ends up costing him the day at work. He's on, 3 strikes and he's out, and he's already had 2 by this point. Like, he has no choice. And then he ends up with this £1,000 debt because he gets beaten up. And that's right. He gets beaten up. So he ends up in hospital. He's lost a day. He has to pay for 2 passports that were supposed to be delivered. That's £500. He has to pay for the scanner that got broken. That's £1,000. So he ends up £1,500 and with possible broken ribs.
But what I don't understand
is he can't get out of the situation.
At the beginning of the film, he says, I'm paying this much for this, that much for that, insurance, blah. And I thought, well, why doesn't the insurance cover him being attacked and robbed?
It's true. It could maybe use more contextualization, but that scene on the phone in the hospital where your man explains to him, this is what it's going to cost you. I don't think there's any questioning that. The guy, I think what you ultimately have to take from it is that the guy's ultimately in charge, and that's a really shitty situation. And actually, it made me think of the Downton Abbey movie in a way, because what happens is the wife then gets on the phone to the boss and says, "This is a fucking joke. How can you be serious about £1,500 you're going to take off my husband for getting beaten up?" But the husband is sat there going, "No, don't," because he knows I rely on this. We all rely on this.
Yes.
And it reminded me in a different way of the servility of the servants in Downton Abbey, where the thing with them was, we want to serve, we love you, you're better than us. And it's not the same here. It's not you're better than us, but it is.
Well, the problem with
it is not being able to speak up.
To except the Downton Abbey, film puts all the accent on the pleasure of serving rather than actually the requirement or the onerousness of serving, that you have no choice.
Exactly. They're very different in that respect. But it has this sense of not being able to speak up to the person who you owe your livelihood to, which is disgusting.
Yes, I mean, I don't know where
I stand on Ken Loach really, because there's this conversation that's been going on Facebook and things, and people have been speaking up about suggesting that the films that he makes are not for the people they're about. They're for the middle class.
I also don't agree with that.
Yeah.
No. So, it's true that, for example, working class people now won't go to cinema, right? I think it's interesting also, if you look at the credits, how this very British film is financed by European funding from all over the place.
Yeah, I saw Belgian, French, British co-production.
Exactly. Yeah. I think most people will end up seeing it on television. And I imagine that the same kind of people who watch other social realist stuff on television will watch this. I don't actually see why, it'll be only middle-class people who will see this stuff on television. I do understand how it might be mainly middle-class people who will see it at the cinema. And actually, I thought today was very telling, because we were by far the youngest people in the audience, and you were like the baby of the outfit, right? Like, everybody seemed to be a pensioner, watching this film. So, so I think that argument is valid, but only if you assume that this film will only circulate in cinemas, which is really not the case.
True.
So, and actually on the one hand, I admire Ken Loach. I think he's very principled in almost every aspect, in his choice of topics, in the way that he makes films, in the way that they're circulated. So, for example, I think Christine Garrity was saying today how he has a discount, or, how he's got this thing where community groups can rent the film at a much cheaper price.
Right.
Yeah, if they want to show them in community halls or so on. So, and I think people are too dismissive of, what is a very, very admirable principled stance on all of this. And I admire it.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with it. My problem is with him as an artist. And actually, I kind of... I think his filmmaking, to me, is very much by the numbers. I remember seeing this film that he did about the Spanish Civil War, and it was like, you had all of these different factions, and anarchist groups, and like you could just see all the wheels turning, and and it was just and actually in such a way that I thought it got in the way of understanding the human situation in that, people suffering and pain. It's an issue that you are kind of confronting, rather than the drama of the people depicted.
Land and Freedom.
I hated it.
Nominated for the Palme d'Or. They disagreed.
Sorry?
Nominated for the Palme d'Or.
I know, and Daniel Blake won it.
I know.
And I mean, he is very much admired in Europe. There's no question about it. And I suppose I admire him. Yeah, I mean, I certainly kind of, I've seen most of the work that he's done in the last 20 years. I keep going to see it, but I keep having a similar kind of feeling about it. Actually, that it's almost like you are a socialist or a Marxist, and you have an idea of the world, right? And you basically put people's lives through this rubric and represent it, but only through the rubric. And the thing about people's lives and people is that they're messy, right? Kind of, it's not a pattern. It's not it's not a thesis. It's not kind of, people's lives are messy, and I think art gets to that messiness. And I don't think that the Ken Loach's films do. I mean, and I think this one probably is as close to it as I've seen, because the family is depicted with great complexity and with great love, actually. So, and I thought that was the best parts of it. All of the situations of both the woman and the man at work, right, to me were like, you could just see the wheels turning, right? It was a thesis kind of being dramatized. Yeah, this big-hearted woman who actually really cares about her patients, but who's not allowed to give them the time and care that that she wants to give, and so actually she's manipulated into really giving extra time, which she's not being paid for. Just out of human kindness, or her kindness is being exploited, right? So, but you could see, you could just see the argument kind of, and the same with the guy at work, and actually all of the co-workers. They're not human interrelationships. Actually, even that bit where he goes to deliver a package and they get into this argument about the football. It just felt like
it
right,
was
like
pretty stilted.
You could just see it coming. So, oops. Oh well, so much for having the house clean. Okay.
You didn't see anyone smoking in this film. Just you.
Just me. Not for long.
See, they weren't even vaping. How's that for realistic? But I suppose the other side that I was going to get to about where I stand on Ken Loach and not knowing where I stand is that I do see the arguments from the one side of feeling the wheels turning, or of the idea of who the audience might be or supposed to be, and this sort of thing. But on the other hand, I think there is something really vital about this. And as you say, he is clearly very principled, and he wants to make a difference.
Yes.
And I think that is admirable. And the thing you were saying about, in this film, and I suppose it was true of Daniel Blake as well, although I don't remember it as well. The idea that things just kind of start off bad and get worse and worse and worse, and you can see it all working mechanically. While that's true, is not necessarily unrealistic, and the fact that things do just get worse and worse and worse in these films is, as I said earlier, scary, and I think meaningfully so. It's not. I don't think it's for effect. It's you kind of, if anything's going to shock you into sort of changing your beliefs or trying to make a difference, it needs to be something that is this polemical.
Except, again, so as a polemic, I don't think it works. Because I do think we know this stuff. He's not showing us anything new, and it's nothing so shocking that people are going to take action about.
But is there a difference between what it shows and the way it makes you feel? I mean, films are about feeling, and does it make you feel?
Well, I mean, I think for me, it kind of... I mean, there was a moment with the interactions with the son that I was moved,
Okay.
right? But that was about the only moment. And actually, as I said, the last 20 minutes of the film was like, no, no, no. Like, you know, kind of in my head, I was saying, oh, you know, kind of, like, how can he do this to an audience? Just boom, boom, worse, 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 worse. You know, it was like, I mean, you know, and I do think that part of the function of art and of drama and so on is well, you know, kind of the Frankfurt School always says is kind of, you know, it should show you the way that things are. So in this case, this film shows you the way that things are, but it also shows you, it's meant to show you the, you know, the way things should be and the gap in between. And I don't think this film kind of does the other bits, you know.
Clearly I had a slightly different reaction because I think I was more affected by the dramatisation of the way things are than you were. Because it did make me do a good deed.
Oh, what was that?
So at the start of the film, you got the lights turned off because the lights hadn't gone off when the film started.
Oh, yes. Shame on Cineworld.
So the lights didn't automatically turn down or I don't know if someone does it. But anyway, the lights didn't go off when the film started. So you went out and got them turned off. And then when the film ended, you rushed off for a cigarette because you were... the film had basically killed you, I think. So, so you went out for a cigarette. And the lights didn't come back on while you weren't there. I didn't tell you this. And... I went out and eventually told someone, you know, you should really get these turned back on because of this. But there were a couple of old people that sat on the front row, and I offered, you know, them help getting out the cinema because they couldn't see.
Ah.
So I did a nice thing. So basically,
you were moved to a kindness by Ken Loach.
So every 2 Ken Loach films I see, I do one nice thing. But you know, I might have just ignored them had it not been for this film. You know, if we'd gone to see Maleficent as we intended to, I don't think I would have helped any old people.
I know. My God, and what a change that was, you know, from the expectation of going to see Maleficent to kind of...
to seeing this. I'm glad we did, though. I think, you know, these... well, I do think you know what you're going to get. I don't think there's a single surprise in this film.
No,
but there is still something valuable about it existing and seeing it.
The one thing I think we must comment on is the central performance.
Oh, yeah. They're all... non-professional or just about professional actors.
The father's great.
I did look this up. Give me a second.
I think the mother was a bit stilted. Chris Hitchen is fantastic. You know, it's a really great performance.
Yeah, and he's been a delivery driver in an episode of Coronation Street, and he's been in a few adverts. So
Okay.
I mean, and I think he is basically the most experienced actor in the film.
Right.
And you can tell that there are so many non-professionals. There's a lot
Yes.
of just about people forgetting their lines and things,
Yes.
which is a bit annoying. But he is great.
Yes, he is great. I mean, the others are they're very good, but there's a slight stiltedness, or you can tell really. And the
I thought the young daughter was good.
The young daughter was good. I like the son as well, though, you know, again, there are moments where it just comes across as like a bit stilted. The worst was the boss.
Oh, do you reckon?
I do, you know.
I went with him, I must say, until he forgot his lines. I think it's like the last scene you see of him and he just stumbles across one line. And I thought, oh, because up until then, although he's been a caricature, I did go with him. But you...
I don't know. I mean...
Do you think it's more the way he's written or the way he's played? Because I can totally see the way he's written being an issue.
I think it's both. It's the way that he's written and the way that he's played. You know, because again, you know, a kind of a boss like that. I mean, I do think that Ken Loach's films lack complexity, for lack of a better word. You know, so I could imagine that boss... You know, I mean, you know, part of his function is to, you know, to exploit workers, but he might not see it that way, right? He probably also has fears about his own job and his own status within the company and how to get things done. You know, so someone like that, for example, might, you know, involve humor or flattery or, there's a whole array of kind of human emotions that are brought to bear even on how you exploit people, right?
I know what you mean.
This was nothing. This was just, I'm boss, I have the power, you do this. Like, you know, a boss like that wouldn't retain employees for very long.
No. I think the film tries to head off that criticism at the past, though, because at one point he says, I know people see me as nasty bastard number one, but I get the results, and our depot's best in the country, and we have the figures, and this, that, and the other. So if I'm nasty bastard number one, it's for a reason. And so the film tries to have him say, yes, I am a caricature, and here's why. But that doesn't really excuse it for being a caricature.
And also, all the other interrelationships with the van drivers, I mean, you would have expected a lot more humor or jokes or... just the little... I mean, we know that life is grim for a lot of people, but actually, the things that get you through that grimness are humor, kindness, so many things. And actually, to deny them to deny working people or poor people all those things that really are kind of like so fundamental to what makes us human is really a problem for me,
I remind you again of the scene with the curry. I agree with you. I mean, he doesn't even get to have sex with his wife. She says tomorrow.
Yes. So I think the affection between them is good. I think the interrelationships with the family are kind of, they're knowable, and thank God for them, because otherwise the film really would be unbearable. So I suppose, I mean,
But you think it's better than I, Daniel Blake? You were suggesting that when you said...
I do think that it's better than I, Daniel Blake.
Yeah?
Yes, I do. I mean...
I think it's less forceful than I, Daniel Blake was, though. And I don't think it has... Although it has that bit where she's on the phone in this to the boss, and that kind of becomes a sort of centrepiece for just exposing all of the stresses and the truth about his situation, that he's not in charge of himself and this sort of thing. She exposes that in dialogue. It doesn't have a moment that is on par with the... it's true. Graffiti on the wall in I, Daniel Blake.
It's true.
Nor does it have a cinematic moment like that. I mean, he's not a very cinematic director. Or I suppose to clarify that, I would say Ken Loach is not a director who shows an awful lot of aesthetic kind of variation.
Yes.
Things were kind of shot with all the same sort of shots and things.
He doesn't trust in the image.
I think that's true. But that's also probably a reason why this film will work on television.
Oh, yes.
But that moment at the end of I, Daniel Blake, as I recall, it was, you see him graffitiing on the wall, but you don't see what it is, because it's kind of close up. And then when the film cuts out to a wide shot and it says I, Daniel Blake, this, that, and the other, that is a cinematic device being used.
Sure.
And this film doesn't have a moment that has any cinematic effect like that.
No, and I mean, the film doesn't have a moment that would make an audience member stand up and say, I'm ashamed of my country the way that I, Daniel Blake, did, right? So it's true. But on the other hand, I think it's kind of subtler, really.
Yeah, I agree. That's the word that occurred to me.
I think it's a better film. So a kind of a mixed bag. I think people who love Ken Loach, I mean, this must be one of his best films, really.
It's less targeted, I would say. I mean, the word subtler did occur to me, but as well as that, less targeted at a clear enemy.
Yes.
The enemy in I, Daniel Blake was absolutely clear that it was the Conservative government and everything they've been doing. And this is far less clear because it's about, as you say, neoliberal systems of oppression and keeping people in these types of work and lying to them about what it is and that sort of thing, and giving them no escape.
Yeah.
You can't put that down to a single government. You can in part. There are parts that
yes.
you can assign to the Tory government, but it's much wider than that.
Yeah.
The enemy is less focused.
And one of the things that I hated about this film, it's like there's that lovely interaction with the old lady, right? But of course, she was with the miners, and you just have this photograph, and she was cooking for 500 people or whatever. And you think, oh come on, wouldn't it have been more interesting to have made her a Tory, kind of
set in her ways, I've got mine.
and still show some kindness and human, I just
it would be more interesting. Everyone is absolutely in agreement in this film apart from the boss, or I suppose anyone who is a representative of a system of oppression.
Yes.
Although actually I would say not so much in the case of the police officer. So the son is getting into trouble and he's skipping school and stuff, and he ends up being arrested for shoplifting, and the dad has to leave work to go and attend to that. And so they're sat there in the basically interview room, and instead of it being a conviction, it gets downgraded to a caution because the dad's there to help figure this all out. And the police officer gives this talk to the kid, saying, this is an opportunity that you have. You have a family who loves you, and that's the most important thing. And I see people come through here who don't have families, and it's awful. You need to take this and move on and use this as or whatever he says. It comes from someone who is the most obvious kind of agent of or authority. Instrument of authority and oppression, but he expresses apparently kind of personal discretion. Yes. And his own opinion, and says something nice, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yes, I like that as well, actually. But I wish there had been more of that. I wish the film would have been better with, more love and more humour.
That was one of the best scenes in the film. I like that, and it was maybe it's because it was such a surprise.
Yeah,
because it was.
But it was still filmed as like a speech.
It wasn't filmed interestingly.
So
there was one other thing, just quickly, that occurred to me, which won't mean anything to you, but I thought it was interesting, which is on the son's. He's got pictures of stuff that he's drawn, posted around his room. He does graffiti and stuff, and there's a picture on his wardrobe of a character from a video game called Abe's Odyssey, right? Uh-huh. And Abe's Odyssey is a film from like 20 years ago, a game from about 20 years ago, and it's about this little alien fella who works in a factory who ends up breaking free of his shackles. And I think the story in the game was that he finds out that all his mates are being used to create food. It's like a Soylent Green type of thing. And but it was brilliant, and it was a really fun game. But it had this real sort of kind of pro workers like fight to break out sort of thing going on, and it's only a kind of it's a name check in here. It's not even a name check; it's just a face that you might recognise, and I would doubt you did.
I didn't.
It occurred to me.
I don't know anything about video games,
and I thought, wow, like I thought Ken Loach can't possibly know about Abe's Odyssey. Who put this in the film? I don't really have anything more to say about that other than that's incredibly curious to me, and I think it's lovely that it's in there because it's not just some video game that the kid plays, it's meaningful. It relates to, again, systems of oppression, breaking out of the systems that you're in. That's what that game's about. I thought that was really interesting. I want to know who put that there.
Well, I mean, I don't know very much of Ken Loach's working methods, but I imagine, it is a collaborative medium, so I'm sure people brought in kind of different aspects to it.
I just thought someone knows that, someone knows what they're doing. Yeah. That was lovely.
Let's summarize this a little bit, because I do actually think that it's one of Ken Loach's very best films. So if you like Ken Loach, it's a film that you should probably go see. As I said, I have a real kind of fundamental difference of worldview with Ken Loach. So, I didn't see it through gritted teeth. That would be wrong, But
I think you saw it with a kind of resignation that, well, we should see this.
Yes, I did, and my own feelings, for what they're worth, is that it bore out that reservation. Right, it was exactly as I expected it to be, except a little bit better than usual. It was a better film than I expected it to be, though the methods of getting there were exactly the same. It's very much a Ken Loach film. It is pretty relentlessly grim.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think the way for me to summarise it is there was no surprise in it, apart from very, very few, and those surprises were really lovely. That bit with the police officer was really lovely, and felt meaningful and felt good. And the bit where the dad realises he has to apologise to his son for hitting him because his son didn't take his keys. He lashed out, and it's the way he says, God, I owe him a big apology. Thought, yeah, you do, and you mean it. Just little things like that I liked, and it has these moments.
Yes, it does. And I was thinking in a larger sense, though I have mixed feelings about this. So I was thinking in a broader sense that no one has bore witness to their time as faithfully as Ken Loach. Yeah, you can chart a social history of Britain through his films. So I think that's very praiseworthy. On the other hand, I always feel a niggle, and I was thinking, well, you can also do it through Coronation Street, or right, or actually, I don't know, like some other genre through the different types of heritage cinema, say, or the different attitudes to the past over time. So it's not just Ken Loach who is kind of bearing witness, But I think
he does it in a certain way.
In a certain way,
yeah,
that I think is a very valuable way.
I agree.
So I almost feel guilty for, having the very considerable reservations that I do have about it.
Well, I mean, it made me do something nice, and so that means it must be working.
You're underselling yourself. You're always doing nice things.
Well, I didn't do anything
got me
nice.
a spider brooch yesterday.
Yeah, I brought 2 spider brooches. I didn't do anything nice at the end of I, Daniel Blake, Although, if anything, that guy didn't really need any help.
Yes.
He was happy as Larry shouting away.
Well, no, I don't remember it that way. I think he was distraught. That old man.
No, I wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't happy. Yeah. But he didn't need any help shouting.
No. I thought he needed a hug, actually.
Yeah, he probably did.
So anyway,
but
frankly, I would say see it at home on television.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's the point. It's
we had a miserable experience. I want to denounce Cineworld a little bit, right? Because it's outrageous.
Fight the power, Jose.
Yeah, I want this on record. It's outrageous that you pay money to go to a cinema. You make all the effort in the fucking rain to get there. You watch all the bloody advertisements and everything. And then the film starts and they forget to turn the lights off and you have to go call someone to turn the bloody lights off in a fucking cinema. And then, the kid who came he came immediately. He was, he was very kind and did it immediately. But then to forget to turn the lights back on at the end of the film is you think, why the fuck are you paying all this money for? So, you better get your act together, Cineworld, because, one is running out of reasons to see movies at the movie theater.
Well, I think
this doesn't help.
I think they did it to give me the opportunity to do something nice. They were playing the long game. Yeah, that was annoying. I'll tell you the other thing, though, that just occurred to me, because what you said, it didn't rain in this film. Not even once.
Oh, that's true.
And it's set up north. And it's supposed to be upsetting.
Yes.
So Ken Loach is clearly doing something. He's subverting expectations. Yeah.
I love the location, actually.
Newcastle again.
Yes.
As our Daniel Blake was set in Newcastle too.
And I love the way that it's shown. It's not the landmark places. It's not, the fancy bistros. It's these terraces and so on, which are a bit worn and so on, but also very much lived in. You do get, one of the things he's very good at evoking is a way of life. And I think the film does do that.
Yeah, good point. Good point to end on.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening. We're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify.
Hurrah!
At last. Our social media is Facebook and Twitter, and our website, with 190 podcasts now, is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Right. Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.